thank you so much, everyone, for joining this morning. We have the Jackie Berry with us talking about selling in CIDs and talking about homeowners associations. You can put your questions in the Q&A, and as we go, I can answer them, just depending on what the question is. Some of them we may save till the end. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Jackie, it's all yours. So welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm extremely excited because somebody did tell me I retired and I said, no, I don't feel like it. So I am doing it as much as I possibly can. I love this industry. I love the agents. I love what we do. And something that I wanted to remind everybody, I have a little book. That has all these sayings in it. It says, there's no shame in not knowing something. The shame comes when you don't find out. So today I'm hoping to impart some information for you that you will be able to be a better agent. And one of the things is as real estate agents, whether we're selling to a home buyer who's going to live on the property, or whether you're selling to an investor, homeowner associations have many twists and turns. They've changed and grown tremendously over the years. So I hope that I'm going to be able to give you some information that will make you that much smarter. And we have to keep remembering that these are people's homes. They're going to live there. And the pandemic has brought that right to the forefront for me, is that people are in their homes and they're stuck there, and there's more things that they do. They might love it. They might need a bigger one. That's when they need you. But also, because they are confined in their property, we have to keep remembering that it is a home. They know where they're going to, when somebody walks in or sees a tour of a property, they know where they're going to have their cup of coffee in the morning. They know where they're going to put that cute little table that they're bringing with them. They know everything that they're going to do to make it their home and theirs. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So I wanted to start because I know you agents have been getting, I love technology, and we get these in a document. It's usually an email, and this is what we get. If you photocopied every single page and you give these to your client that's buying, and you say, okay, here's all the homeowner association docs. It's in this little link. They're all run together. There's 580 pages, but you have to read them, understand them, and agree to them within 3 working days. And the people go, oh my gosh, their eyes glaze over. They sometimes go into a little bit of a panic. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make common sense out of this, and we're going to put it into an order for you as well as your clients, that you can explain it. And we have I'm going to go through a report, and I'm going to tell you the secrets of where you find out the type of property that you are actually selling, so that you have, I'm going to get my little agenda out here too, because I wanted to talk about the things that are on that little flyer that we did. So I kind of have been thinking about this for a long time. And one of the things that people do not understand is when you're a real estate agent and you're showing somebody a condominium or a planned development, a single family house that's attached to a common interest development, meaning there's common elements to it that everybody owns and has the use of. And so that's why we call them CIDs. Within those CIDs, and I'm going to use these 3 terms, one is a condominium. A condominium is an airspace ownership. It's where you own anything from the walls in, the ceiling down, and the floor up. That's yours. And then you have a planned unit development. That is where you own the building and the land underneath. Now, the maintenance disclosures are very different in some of them and very similar in others. I know that everybody likes to call those little row houses or townhouses, and you believe that that's an ownership. But that townhouse is either a condominium or a planned unit development. There is no ownership style or type called townhouse. That's just a style or a building structure. So I want to bring up, I'm going to see if I can share my screen with you. This is new to me because I'm getting used to it. Let's see. Okay. So I have some documents. I'm going to go through a couple of them for you because one of the things that happens is everybody's always saying, well, how do I know if it's a condominium or a planned unit development? So I'm going to show you how you do that. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Let me open up this little preliminary title report. I hope everybody can see it. And what this is it's your preliminary title report. I'm not sure how many agents actually ever look at this. They know it's a document that goes in the package. They're not quite sure what they should do with it, but they know they need it. And so primarily it's produced by the title company, and it has secret information in it that I'm going to impart to you today. So the first thing that you need to do is just, I'm going to kind of scroll down here. Hopefully you're seeing this. If you're not, somebody from CAR, let me know, because I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with me. So basically,
we can see it.
Oh, good. Okay. So primarily it says that it's a preliminary title report. You can see that right here. And in the preliminary title report are all the secrets to that property. The first thing I want you to ever look at is what date was it produced? If it's more than 60 days, which sometimes happens, we know that properties do not stay on the market for long periods of time these days, but we want to know when that prelim was done. Now, this year, there is a new law that requires the associations to either amend or restate their governing documents. The CC&Rs, those are the ones that are recorded. Your articles and your bylaws are not. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but the actual CC&Rs are in fact recorded. I thought I could. Okay, so my phone's ringing. I was going to try and get it off, but that's okay. So this one was actually done on December 18th, 2020 at 7:30 a.m. in the morning. That's not too old. That's less than, it's just roughly a month old. If it was 60 days or 90 days old, you don't want to trust that. Now, the other thing I want you to know is that the title companies are not checking to see if any amendments to the CC&Rs are made on every transaction. They'll do it when they're asked to do it. The title department forgets that these associations restate their governing documents. So sometimes, the reason I asked for this prelim is because sometimes I will have a document from the HOA that was recorded, but it doesn't show up on the prelim. Likewise, sometimes that management company got that package from a different management company or someone that put together documents, and I have a document on the prelim that they don't have. So either or, it can go back and forth, either or. But this is the year that you want to really watch what's going on. The law that came into effect that they are having to restate their governing documents, I know most of you have heard about, is the rental restriction. Some associations don't have rental restrictions in their governing documents. They may or may not want a rental restriction. If they don't want a rental restriction, they don't have to do anything to the documents. But if they want a rental restriction, the new law requires that they have a minimum of 25% of them can be rented. A lot of governing documents will say they have 20% or 15% can be rented. That's null and void. 25 is the bottom. So if they're going to have a restriction, it's going to be 25 or more. And then they have to fill in other kinds of things about how the rentals would happen. They can no longer restrict them if by saying you have to live there for a year before you can rent it. They should have, if they have a rental restriction that they're going to have in their governing documents, they in fact should have a method by how do you get on the list, to be on the waiting list. Do you get a copy of the contract as the association? Many things like that. So it's kind of the procedures and practices that that association wants to guideline their rentals by. So in this particular instance, I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. Remember, we were talking about what and where you find, this is a secret, it's in your preliminary title report, what type of property. Is it a condominium? Is it a planned unit development? And that's where we're going to find this. So you can see that somewhere, every preliminary title company will do their forms a little bit different. So what you're really looking for is you're looking for this legal description that I have on my little section, and I yellow lined it. Hopefully you can see that. And we're going to come down. This one, I know I wanted to show you this, and we're getting there. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. See where it says number 6, conditions, covenants, and restrictions? But look how many amendments to that document were done. Sometimes many. But when I look at the preliminary title reports, I usually will go to the last one. Remember, I talked about restating the governing documents? Here it is. Restated and superseded all previous CC&R. So all those ones that you saw above are not valid. This is the one that's valid. They had it on the prelim, but the management company gave us an unsigned and undated and unrecorded copy. So I was able, we always take our CC&Rs off of the prelim, no matter what we get from the HOA, okay? The reason for that is because that's actually recorded, and we don't know whether the other one is missing pages or whatever. We want something that gives us a little more oomph to it that says this is the legal document. Okay, so you're gonna keep coming down here for a little while. Remember, we're looking for the actual document that says what kind of property. There it is. So this one is on page 6 of 16. This tells you what the people are buying. See where it says villas number 20. That means it's a unit. Anytime you see the word unit or something in this kind of a description, it is always a condominium, airspace ownership. If the word lot 20, the word LOT is in front of it, it is always a planned unit development because they own the lot and the building structure that's sitting on that. That is ownership. So when you see that title, you want to know. A lot of times people say, well, what about the parking space? What about the storage space? How do I know what's assigned to me? If they've been assigned at the time of the original sale through the grant deed, you will see it on your prelim, and it will more likely be right after it says parcel 2, there's your garage number. When you come down, exclusive use and easement to the patio, balconies, and decks, overhangs, there you go. It tells you exactly. So this one's a balcony or a patio that's actually part of the unit. So that's how you know that. Most of the time, unless it's been phased in, you will get a document that will tell you basically the number of units in the project. It could also be a number of units within a phase. But in this particular instance, it's going to be the entire project. You'll always get a copy of the track map. We love those because it gives you a lot of little detail. It'll tell you where your garage is. It tells you the number of the units. All of those things will give your client a little more information. If nothing else, when you're doing a listing, you can get some of your information for your listing form right off of this document. And again, this is what I consider a legal document. So if there's something listed here that you didn't get in the package, you want to know that. And just make sure that you put anything that's in here that would benefit them right into the package. That's one of the things that we do. So that's the prelim. That's the secret of deciding or finding out exactly what you own. Lot, always a planned unit development. The land is included and the building. And let's see, these are, I want to go to that track map again and just see if there's, as you can see, these are kind of like all put, I don't know if I can make this bigger. Let's see if I can make it a little bit bigger. I could, all right. Let's go to 200. I know I'm getting old, I can't see, but that's part of it, you know? Okay, so you can see that there are, looks like there's 3 units per section. So you're looking, or, and then you can see the garages. It'll tell you that number, remember, was in the prelim, tells you exactly what unit that, which number that you own. That's it for the prelim. If anybody's got some questions about prelims, the ladies can let me know and we can go through those now. And then we'll close this one out and move on to the next section. Okay, I'm going to move on. If we do get one on the prelim, they'll provide that for us and we'll go through it. So everybody always says, what do you do? And one of the things, I owned a management company for 27 years. I started out as a very young, aggressive young woman with a 5-year-old daughter, sold my house in Willow Glen, bought into a condominium because my mother was in real estate and said, this is a new kind of ownership. And so I bought it and went from a quarter of an acre down to 800 square feet. I think it was 800. I paid $12,500 for it. The governing documents, which were then called declarations, I still see those, by the way. There was called a declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, was 8 pages long. They were all guideline towards FHA and VA type mortgages. So it was a pretty simple concept. Well, I went to the pool. I lived in Cherry Plaza, which had 2 swimming pools, 460 unit. And I was told by a woman who said that was the president, and her baby was there with her crying. And she told me I couldn't have any of my daughter's friends. And so I didn't like that. And they were having an annual meeting. I went and volunteered for the pool committee, fully thinking I was going to get those rules and regulations changed. And instead, 2 weeks later, I was the board president of a 460 unit project. I had to change my major in college. I changed my life and I haven't regretted it 1 minute the whole time that we've been doing it. And it was a long time ago. Anyway, I also, during that time, I was going to college and one of my college professors said, anybody who wants to be a real estate agent, stay in this class, but anybody who doesn't, you might want to find a different class. 26 of us signed up for Anthony's real estate school back in those days. And we went and 18 of us got our licenses. Our first transaction was of 4 duplexes behind Valley Fair, now Westgate. And we did it on a napkin in Stickney's restaurant. And I know you would be blown away by it now because remember, your contract documents are almost as big as a homeowner association documents. So things change over the years, don't they? All right, so now we're going to go into what is a report, what does it do, and what does it have to deal with these homeowner associations.
Hey, Jackie, if you want, we can go through the first set of questions that I have had come in.
Perfect. All right,
okay.
Let's do that.
The first one I will say is, yes, this is being recorded and we will share it probably, what's today? Today's Thursday. Possibly tomorrow, it might be on Monday, but we will get this out to everybody. First question, what is the exact ownership of condominium versus townhouse versus single family residence? Has the condo building ownership, what is the difference between PUD ownership and townhouse?
Great question. Okay. So a PUD is planned unit development, townhouse is a style, and condominium is airspace ownership. So you own the inside of the unit, the walls in, the floor up, the ceiling down, and the association owns all of the other common area, the roof, the landscaping, the pool, the windows, the sidewalks, everything else except for the interior of your unit. And so that's a condominium. In a planned unit development, you literally own that building and the land underneath it. And the difference here is separating the differences between what maintenance work the association does with what the association does. Even in a condominium, that is what they gather their money. They have two parts to their budget. One is operating and the other is the reserves. They contribute a certain portion of the monthly dues to go into a big pile of money that will be able to do the roof and do the painting. And some of the associations, depending on the year that their governing documents were done, or if they haven't done an amendment, they may do an amendment to make the owners responsible for the windows or something like that. The way they come up with who is responsible is in the governing documents. The CC&Rs should be able to tell you, and we'll go back to a set of the CC&Rs afterwards, if you would like. In the CC&Rs, there's a section that says, here's what the association is responsible for, here's what the owner is responsible for. That, if it's in the CC&Rs, is recorded and it becomes law. If they have a budget and there's nothing that says that they're responsible to replace the windows in the governing documents, then it could be in the budget and you would look to see if that was part of the reserve study. So important pieces in your contract here is to take a look at what your CC&Rs say versus what the budget does. That's one of the things that we're doing when we're reviewing these documents. The difference between a planned unit development, remember, you own the land and the building. In a condominium, only the floor is up, the ceiling in, and the walls. I mean, the floor is up, the ceiling down, and the walls in. Everything. So if something goes wrong with the faucet in your kitchen, you're responsible. If a water leak happens underneath the sink or in your toilet, you're responsible. And we're going to spend some time on the insurance so that you know the difference there also. So anything that has to do with what you're responsible for will be listed in the CC&Rs and or will be part of the budget and the reserve study. So those are the documents that you're going to want to look at to see. It's not always clear. I mean, termites are one of the biggest concerns because in the older documents, they don't mention termites. They didn't even think termites would come and eat their buildings. But termites are little nasty boogers and they eat 24/7 and they're not proprietary. They don't care what they eat as long as it's wood. So I know that in a condominium, you don't own that building. So the association, the majority of the time, you will find are responsible for the termites and the dry rot. If it's not under your sink or somewhere within those walls and those floors and that ceiling. So if it's in the structure, and most of you, when you list a condominium, you'll get a termite report. You get it on the inside of the unit. That doesn't do you any good because you need the outside too, even though it's connected to 2 or 3 other units. You're checking around the garage because if you find termite poop, you know it's not just eating that unit. It's going to eat anything in sight. So that's what you really want to know because that termite report should go to the association so that they can sign off on those things that they will do so the owner knows which things they're supposed to do before they complete that transaction. So termites, dry rot is a whole different story. Water leaks. We're going to talk about insurance because most, I would say 99.5% of the associations do not have flood insurance. So if your sink or your toilet goes over or your washer and dryer, there's no coverage for it. It'll come out of your pocket, number one, to fix your unit and any other damage that it might have caused. So I like to do that in the insurance because people really don't understand what that means. And we spend a lot of time with the owners, the buyers. The sellers, we should be doing these reports for because ultimately the responsible order is seller is ultimately responsible for all disclosures. So if the association is not disclosing, the owner's still going to be responsible because he should have known they weren't. And I had an agent tell me, she was very mad at me yesterday, but she said to me, well, I don't want you to tell my client about the deficit in the reserves. And she goes, and I don't want you to talk to him about that deficit in any form, like what it's going to, that he's going to have to pay it or whether it should be negotiated. And I said, well, let's see how the conversation goes. And she did skate around it a little bit, but we did have a conference call. I like to have the conference call at the end with the client and the agent. We don't want to be involved in saying something, but we're going to have a conversation with you first if it's really a terrible situation. So in any case, I hope that answers that question. There is no ownership in a townhouse. It's either a condo or a PUD. Single family homes. I do want to let you know that I manage the disclosures for a project in Milpitas. 36 homes, single family, 0 lot line. And it has an association and it's a condo. So the title for condos is you own the airspace. But sometimes cities, counties, or the developer puts it as a condo because they like that name and it starts with a C. So they like that, and so they will give it the name. In that project that we work with in the single family homes, the owners are, in the governing documents, it spells out all the things that the owners are responsible for versus what the association is. And in a planned unit development, the association, as in this one, even though it's called a condo, all of the common areas, the landscaping, the roadways, the swimming pool, the little playground, fencing around the common areas, that type of stuff all belong to the association. So the ownership is one thing, but the obligation for the maintenance of all of that is something entirely different and not easily found. So condo, you can always look at it, you can see the blue sky, and if it's a PUD, you're pretty much responsible for everything. And again, you have to look at the CC&Rs to see that, okay?
So we got tons of questions coming in. So I'm going to pull a few of these and then I'll let you get back to it and we'll come back. Since you talked about parking, somebody says, I have a question regarding the parking space. If it does not belong to the unit in the prelim, but it's assigned to the unit to use, what does it mean?
Okay, it means that what the developer was is he was lazy when he did his first process. And that's my own opinion. But then I'm an opinionated person, right? So the assignment is exactly the same thing. Even though it's not grant deeded, that assignment is, they can't take that away. Once they've been assigned, and they're generally done at the time of sale. So in the sales, what the sales offices used to do in some of the projects is actually sell those parking places to the new buyer rather than just assigning it, okay? So if it's assigned, it's exactly the same. Prelim just means that it's cemented. And the other one, you got to find a document, usually at the end of the CC&Rs, that will identify that the association has assigned certain parking places and storage areas to a specific unit. So it's not really a lot of difference. It's just nicer when it's tied into the actual grant deed.
Okay. I'm going to do 2 more questions and they kind of go together, I think, a little bit. So the first part is, should we assume that an HOA will maintain or replace a roof since the HOA owns the building? And I think another question that I saw that kind of goes, it has to do with water damage through the ceiling. Like if you're on a 2-level condo and the upstairs unit floods, goes through the ceiling, does the HOA cover what's between everything, or is that the upstairs person pays for the downstairs person?
Okay, that's good questions. We can never assume anything in a homeowner association until you've read the governing documents. or go to your reserve study to see if the roof is included. Most of the time in a planned unit development, the PUD, they sometimes will have if it's a single, like a townhouse and then another one right next to it, not the stacked units. If you've got 2 units stacked on top of them, they're always airspace ownership. So you set that aside. In a planned unit development where it's a townhouse, you can be sure that it will state who's responsible for the roof in the governing documents, and it will also show up in the reserves. Now, I had somebody, we just had one a couple of weeks ago that we were reviewing, and the reviewer called me and he goes, I don't know what to do with this. It says the association's responsible for the roof, but there's no component listed in the reserve study. What do? Somebody tried balancing the budget and they took a major component out thinking they weren't going to have to do it for 20 years. They're on 18 and now the roofs are failing and they never bothered to put that component back. So the components that go into a reserve, anything that has a 30-year life or less is in the budget. Even if it's got a 7-year, it can only max out at 30. Anything is, if you've got a 40-year tile roof and it gets to 30 years, you got to put it on to the report. The other 10 are kind of freebies. But if anything 30 years that has a 30-year life or more, okay, you can not put on there. But anything that has a 30-year life less has to go on that reserve. This is one of my pet peeves, that they will take a roof and say, oh, well, we don't have to do it for 20 years. And so let's take it out of the budget and not contribute to that until we get closer. And that way we'll keep our dues low and we'll just do special assessments when it comes time. Well, Carr got a bill passed on the budget and we're going to go through that and I'll talk a little bit more about that particular bill. But those are the things that you want to see. We see them when we're looking at the documents because there's specific areas, but your CC&Rs will tell you who's responsible for that roof, and then it will be backed up by your reserve study. As far as the leak from the top floor to the bottom floor, if it was a pipe on the inside of their unit, they're responsible. If it's a common area pipe that runs through the wall and is used for both of those units, they might have to split the cost. But that again is something that you have to look at the governing documents. You have to be aware of it. And part of the insurance that we're going to talk about, you should get your own flood inside for the unit. So if your washer dryer or your garbage disposal or something like that actually breaks and causes damage to another unit, that you're at least covered. And that will go more through in the insurance. I hope that answers that question. Never assume anything when it comes to an HOA.
So we're gonna keep going on because some of this may get answered in your insurance piece. So yeah. I'll let you keep going on and then we'll do a little break a little bit later for more questions.
That's great. Okay. So how much time have I got left? Let's see,
no, you got we have about an hour.
Good, we're doing, man, yeah, I'm moving.
We're good.
When you don't have people in front and we're not doing those questions right away, that's kind of interesting. Okay. So everybody has always said to me, what does your report do? How do you do it? How do we know what we're getting? And how do we explain it to our client? That's why we started going to the half-hour conversation. And it also educates our agents so that they're fully aware of how things are being presented in the package. We look at probably about, there's 55,000 associations in the state of California. It's a quarter of our housing market right now. And less than 5% are funded to a level that will not create or cause special assessments down the line. And so I like to go through that in kind of detail. I did this review and it's why I pulled one that I do. I like the way George, one of the fellows in our office, does the content is the same. It's the comments that change from time to time. To make it easy, the report is all the information in blown up fashion. At the very back, there's a couple of pages, one that says, here's a question we weren't able to answer in the report. And here's all the, and the next page is, here's all the comments for every single section in that association. So that you don't have to go through a 9-page report. Well, this is 11 pages, just the last 2, if you were going to try and explain whatever to your clients or understand it yourself. We first of all tell you the name of the association, who the property manager is, what their phone number is, and what the email contact is if we have it. Sometimes we don't have the email, but we do try and get you everything else. This is generally on one of the documents. It could be on a budget, it could be on a demand. And we verify that by going to the Secretary of State's database, because they actually have to file 2 documents with the Secretary of State if it's incorporated. Now, not every association is incorporated in the state of California. That 55,000, they're not all registered as a corporation. Some of the smaller, I did one 2 units, up to 20 units. Sometimes they don't think that they should have to have a corporation. I'm under the firm belief that they need that for liability, but some of them don't want to do that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. The next thing is, who's the current owner? What's the physical address? And who the requester, who was the requested it, and the reviewer, so that you can always go back. I had a guy that called me the other night. I hadn't done a transaction for him in 10 years. And he says, the only way I found who you were is I went into my old documents that I put on my computer, and there was your name and phone number. So I was hoping that it hadn't changed. So we kind of give you some heads up. I want to talk about the Davis-Sterling Act. The Davis-Sterling Act is all the laws that govern the way the associations have to run their business and do their operations. How many board members, how many, there's rules and regulations around, like the new law that they have to report on, change their governing documents in their bylaws about, in their CC&Rs about not only elections, but rental restrictions. Last year was as the elections. So that the Davis-Sterling Act has a website. It was done by a couple of attorneys. One of the partners is Larry Sterling, and Larry Sterling is the auditor or the person that helped to put together the Davis-Sterling Act. So they put together an absolutely amazing website. You can get a newsletter. I get them every Sunday morning. I was telling somebody yesterday, I get them when I'm sitting in church and I want to read them, but I can't read them yet. And then I go in my car and I read it before I go home because I'm laughing every single time. But any hot issue in the associations is there. All of these laws are there. Each of the laws are numbered. And about 5 years ago, they changed all the numbering systems, because before, Davis-Sterling meant corporate laws. Every time a corporate law changed, so did our Davis-Sterling. They were business and professional codes, telling people how they had to do the business of the industry. And then they were consumer bound, so that any laws about consumers and what their rights were all part of it. And every time one of those would change, so did the Davis-Sterling. Well, a few years ago, they changed it so that it's a standalone set of documents. If something changes in the industry, the law will change. But if something changes in the outside world, other than homeowner associations, it doesn't change. So the very first section on my little form here is the incorporation. This is important, and I have agents all the time say, well, why do you worry about if it's incorporated or not? Because if it's incorporated and it has been suspended, that corporation has lost all of its rights to conduct business or defend themselves in a lawsuit. High liability to the membership. So in this particular instance, what it does is it has basically two questions about the homeowners. Are they incorporated? Yes. What year did they first incorporate it? They said in 7/27/71. And is the corporation in good standing? And it says yes. That's what you want to know. You don't want my little saying down here that says it's been suspended, because I just cut and pasted out of the Davis Sterling Act and put it in the back bar so that I can just push a button and get that'll all fill out in there. Okay, so this is the next section that we were talking about earlier. And this is the you're going to see that all of these are 4525 required disclosures to a prospective buyer, to owners and to prospective buyers. And this tells you that it's a condominium, and it gives you the full throttle definition of what a condo is right there. And if there was any comments like it's a mixed use, or there's sometimes where half of the project's a PUD and another half is a condo, lots of little quirky things. If that comes up, then we have a comment section that would be pulled to the back. Okay. Then this goes into insurance. I want to see if I can get the whole thing here. We've made a comment in there based on what the law says they're supposed to have. And you'll have a statement of insurance. And that statement of insurance will be found most of the time in the budget, the pro forma operating budget for that current year. What you want to know is, when does it expire? Who is the agent and what is their phone number? This expiration date is extremely important, because a lot of times if they send the budget out in October and that policy changes in December, you wouldn't have a current statement of insurance. You want a current statement of insurance because you want to know that all of these things are still in place. One of the things that you want to know about, and we tell your clients, is you can see that this $5,000 deductible over here, this is on that, my toilet overflowed and damaged your unit below me. This $5,000 means that if you were going to use the association's policy, you pay the first, the guy who's had the leak is going to pay the first $5,000, and the association will pick up anything over and above that. However, the board may decide that you were negligent, you didn't change out that faucet that you were supposed to, or the pipe underneath your sink, you knew you were wrapping it with duct tape because you knew it was leaking and you didn't fix it. They may want to subrogate against you. So this is where you're supposed to get your policy. The association tells you the blanket policy and what they will cover. And now you have to do your own due diligence. It's called an HO6 if you're living in the property, and there's a different one if you're a landlord. But the one where you live in it, you are going to get your own policy, an HO6, and you're going to get a liability policy, because that liability policy, if you were to invite me over for dinner and I got injured by slipping in your kitchen, you're going to want to throw me on the common area to make it so that the association's policy picks it up, because otherwise I'm coming after your policy, and if you don't have one, that would be a shame. So you want a liability policy to cover the interior of your unit, your personal items, and you might not like that $5,000. You might want to reduce it to $1,000, so you can get an additional rider to your policy to reduce that deductible. You can see that they don't, in this particular association, they don't have earthquake, they don't have flood, workers' comp. Ordinance is a policy that sometimes the agents leave off, and I don't know, intentionally or unintentionally, but that means that if the building was built in 2071, which this one was, and it costs more to do it today to rebuild that, and there were codes that have to be handled, then you want to know that there's ordinance cover that they will pick up that to rebuild the building if it's burnt to the ground or has some other reason why you can't be there. So ordinance is important. If I leave it blank, it'll usually pull it to the last page where the questions are. It's not a big deal, but it certainly is one that you might want to consider if the building is really old. Okay, fidelity bond. Fidelity bond is a new law about 3 years ago. Before it was a lender's requirement. Lenders required that the fidelity bond that the association carried to protect their mortgage and their building that they're loaning the money on was what is in the reserves plus 3 months worth of assessments. Well, the homeowners association people that make up the laws in Sacramento like that. So they came up with the same policy and it became part of the Davis-Sterling Act. So now we check every single transaction to make sure that that fidelity bond is equal to, and I'm going to show you that here in a second. You can see that they're in the fidelity bond on the page that we got, said they had a $75,000 fidelity bond. Well, this is the next section. Here we are. You're going to see frequently that I put not in compliance. If it says not in compliance, that means that there's something amiss that needs to be looked at. Sometimes it takes a board of directors to see it, know it, and change it. In this particular instance, the way we come to the calculations is what was on the balance sheet on 11/30/2020 was they had 165,306.93 in the reserves for that balance. Okay, that's the balance in their reserves. Then it says, how much are you going to contribute this year to the reserves? That's from the tongue-tied. That's from the budget. That is a line item in your budget. So you want to know how much are they going to contribute to the reserves this year. They haven't done it yet. They've got a year to do it, but how much is it going to be? So in this case, 67,266. Okay, now their monthly dues are something. So you divide that out by 12, which comes out to $11,842. And you multiply that by 3, which is the 35. You put in what you do have already. So the current total required is $268,098.93. Good idea that if your insurance policy comes due in September, that you have this full amount, unless you're going to be spending a great deal of money out of those reserves. So they're short by $193,098.93. That's what should get reported to the board and the manager so that they can increase it. If they're going to spend $300,000 out of their reserves, that's probably not a big deal. But it could be if somebody walks away with money, they've only got 75,000 of that 165 covered. So they're short. That means that comes out of everybody's pocket. Hasn't seen too many of those recently. People have a harder time getting money out because of what the new laws have said about boards having to review these financials. Okay, so that gives you a pretty good idea. It says missing the fidelity bond coverage required Davis-Sterling Act and lender required. What is in the reserves plus 3 months worth of assessments? We try and not leave anything to your imagination. If you don't understand it and you've reviewed it before we review it with you and your client, ask that question because we want to help you find out. This is where we tell your client, this is what the association covers, these things up here. And the $5,000 is a deductible. So if you want to reduce that, you're going to have to get your own policy. And we explained that policy we talked about just a couple of minutes ago. So that's insurance. Is there any insurance questions, Jody?
Sorry. Yeah, there's a lot.
Okay. Right.
So
I'm not an insurance agent, but I can make it up. No, I'm just teasing.
I'm gonna kind of go through there's all kinds of stuff in here. Let's see.
Okay.
What was the build date for the insurance? So I'm wondering if that was specific, if the question is specific to this, or is that probably in general a build? What do you give as the build date?
Okay, the billing date, you mean when they pay the bill?
The build, like when I'm
Oh, the build, the year that it's built. Okay. Remember that it was incorporated. Let's go back up here and see when it was incorporated. It was incorporated in 7/27/71. They usually will incorporate it just before they start building or when they're ready to sell them. Okay, so somewhere around, you can get as close as, it was probably built in 1971, and it probably went, since there were 32 units, through 2002, 2003. I mean, excuse me, 72 or 73. So that you can find out by the incorporation date. Another way of finding it out is on your prelim, because it'll tell you when the first set of articles of CC&Rs, conditions, covenants, and restrictions, or if it was older, the declaration, it'll tell you when that was recorded. Governing documents get recorded at the time that they're going to start to sell. Because they have to go through the DRE, and DRE sets out a whole bunch of criteria for the developers. Okay.
I'm going to ask this one first. As a percentage, what should reserves be of a total budget? I've had potential buyers on my listing sometimes say the reserves are not enough.
Only 5% of the 55,000 are enough. Everything else is delinquent. And we're getting into that now. So let's take that question, because I'm going to spend some time on that. This is one of the biggest misnomers that people have. CARB did a new bill several years ago that required that, and I'm going to go through that. That's our very next thing. Okay. Anything else on insurance?
Well, there's a couple on fidelity bonds. So the first, I'm going to read both of them because they may be related. What is a fidelity bond? You explained about what changed 3 years ago about the lender requirement, but what is it? And then, will a lender not lend on the unit if the fidelity bond is not adequate?
Good questions. Okay. First of all, the fidelity bond is a dishonesty bond. When someone steals the money from the association that they have generally in the reserves, they find ways to suck it out, and then pretty soon it's drained. It's where it is actually a dishonesty bond. So it's stealing money. It could be an employee. I can tell you a story real quick. There was a manager that many years ago he was undercutting everybody in the pricing to do the management. And I knew that there was something wrong because we'd taken on a couple of his projects. What was happening is that he had fake invoices and fake vendors, and he was paying them a lot of money, but it was just basically coming back through him to him, because the association would pay him, and then he was supposed to pay the invoice. Well, they never did any work. There was no such company, and he had the money in his account. He did several $1 million out of the projects that he did. He did get caught. He did have to go to jail, and I won't go into the sad story, but none of the associations got their money back, because at that time, nobody felt that fidelity bonds were reasonable. So this number is the amount that would be covered out of this 165,306. That's what's in the reserves for that particular, and it's only 75,000. So they've got almost 100,000 or $90,000 that's not covered. So if somebody got all of their, if they got that whole 165, they would not be able to recover any of it because there would not be any money, and the insurance would not cover it. So hopefully that tells you it's a dishonesty bond, fidelity bond. It's basically to cover the funds that are in the reserves. As far as the lenders are concerned, they always ask for the fidelity bond. I have seen in the past where they were so low, they would not make a loan before the association got the fidelity bond. So I'm not seeing that as much in the lenders at this point, but it is something that they do look at because they want those funds protected. They look at it as, what are we going to have to pay if somebody rips off that money and that person gives us the house back? And so they look at it a little bit different. And basically that is an FHA and VA regulation that there has to be a fidelity bond in place. Okay. Is there another question on insurance?
I am having a hard time hearing you. So I think you finished that one. But I'm going to ask, so the HOA has to increase the fidelity bond?
They should increase. They don't have to do anything. The ultimate is that the board is told what they're supposed to have and they make a choice. And that's one of the big things on the reserves. So they may choose that, hey, you know, nobody's going to steal our money. We don't care. 75,000 is good. But to increase that fidelity bond, it's a small amount of dollars, couple $100 maybe, to get it to the 165 or to the 268.98. So,
And then I'll ask this one, isn't it part of the law?
the fidelity bond is now part of the law because it requires that they have one. We tell them now what they're supposed to have, but it's still up to the board of directors because, you know, it's also the law that a homeowner, each individual homeowner is supposed to have their own policy. And 87% of the people don't. So let me liken this to something else. One day I went out. I was free and not quarantined in, right? So I'm driving down the street and there's this one light that I swear to you, I can never get through it before the yellow light goes red. Okay. I don't know why. I don't start out going through it in yellow, but it's a very quick light. And I said, all of these laws are exactly like that. You can go through that light, and if you go through it at a certain point and it turns red, they're going to take a picture and send you a ticket. Okay. There's no police officer or enforcement body right now that if an association doesn't follow the law, that they go after them. Okay. So only the owners have that right. And most of the time they get a document, like they get the budgets once a year. They get a CPA year once a year. And it either goes in the circular or it sits in a pile on their countertop and they never look at it. Where this is the biggest investment that they have, and that budget tells them how healthy their homeowner association is. And that is something that they should know. So they don't, but it is the law, but there is basically little, if any, enforcement unless something happens and then they get taken to task. The board of directors, if they make a bad business judgment, are covered under their directors and officers policy. So they'll defend them, but if they're found negligent, they won't pay the claim. Okay, so that's one piece that's just a little bit of a jump further. I know insurance gets to be a very quirky little thing, but remember there's two policies. One, the association covers. You give the statement of insurance to your agent and let him bond around it or ask questions of the association's agent so he gets you covered and you're protected. You can be protected separately even if the association's not in compliance.
So there's lots of questions in here. We got about a half an hour. So I'll let you keep going. And then if we get to if we get to the 11:30 mark, if you're okay staying on a little bit after to go through all these questions, then we can keep going with questions.
Yeah, let's do that. I'm fine with that. I never know if it's going to take an hour and a half, 2 hours, but yes, it's a lot of stuff that goes on. Okay, so my next part is my very favorite. It is the financial health of the association. And the budget, the reserve study, and a current balance sheet, which is not a required disclosure, but we always ask for it because it gives you current numbers. Usually your CPA report or your year end is too old. Like if their budget was started in July, like this one did, then it's old and it's several months old. So we like things that are within 60 days to give us a little more correct information, but we sort of get the in-between stuff. Okay, so on your car form, on your car contract, there is a page where you say that you're ordering the documents, and there's several questions. You will note that well, you might know, but I'm changing this a little bit because some of the laws have changed, but all of the questions there are exactly what it is here. They're asking the association to give them to them, and they'll give you a budget and say, well, here's our budget. It has all of that stuff in it, and you can't read it because they don't give you a document that has the information that you can understand. Some people are really good. Like we find things in the minutes. We'll find things in a newsletter if they give them to us. You know, about some of this stuff. We found a litigation in an old set of documents that they put the CC&Rs. It was an attachment to the CC&Rs, and it was a brand new litigation. So we're going to talk about that. We'll get there too. Okay, financial is probably the one thing that all agents should know about, because I had an agent that said to me, well, we're not responsible to review these documents. And I said, I think that if you think about it, you're responsible to review them. You're not responsible to evaluate them. And so that's what you're having us do. But you should know what's in those documents, because remember, we've got dual disclosure. The home, you know, they know what they're buying because they see it, they touch it, they feel it. The homeowner association is there. I mean, it's supposed to do certain things and it may or may not do them. And so, but it is a big part. The only duty of that corporation is to maintain, preserve, and enhance your properties. That's it. If they're not doing that, if they're not putting enough in the reserves, they have to disclose that to you. And then your buyers get to make a decision whether they're willing to go in somewhere where they're not collecting enough for the reserves. And sooner or later, that's going to come back to the pocketbook of whoever owns the property at that moment. So it's tag, you're it. So that's all. That's one of the things that I spend a lot of time on. And you can see the budget, we go through the budget, and if we can't answer these questions, it gets pulled to the back page showing that they didn't give us an estimate revenue and expenses on the accrual basis. You know, what does that mean? It means that they project out for 12 months. If they haven't projected out for 12 months, but they only give you a month, here's what we spend in a month, then that's going to be a little bit short of what it needs. But here are the questions. I like to spend time on these because these are the ones that are the least understandable. And then down here at the bottom, I'm going to bring you down to my little notes, because we've actually taken the scale out of the reserve study. They have an organization called APRA, which is all the reserve study companies are licensed, and well, they're not really licensed, I guess, but they actually have a group that they participate with. And this is the funding levels. If it's 0 to 30%, you can expect frequent and significant special assessments. If it's 31 to 69%, expect significant increases in monthly assessments and special assessments. You're starting to see this monthly increase where they were $150 3 years ago, and they're now in the 400s. Everybody says, oh my gosh, their dues really went up. Or they'll say, oh, those dues are really low, and look how pretty the place is. Well, it's 6 months old, and so their dues would be lower. So there's differences on each side to balance the scale out. If it's 70 to 100%, you can consider this financially strong and a special assessment should be rare. However, that's the percentages based on a whole bunch of associations that are of different sizes, different types, and different requirements. But in our reserves, our little reserve information, we're looking at what they are today. I always tell my agents, don't look at the percentage funded because it's distracting, okay? We're gonna come back up here. I'm sorry, I'm not going so fast. What happens is we look at what the reserve study says they should have in their reserves. It is also part of the yearly budget. It's called Assessment Reserve Funding Disclosure. That form is calculated every single year based on work that the association did the previous year, and the reserve company updates that particular form and possibly even some of the numbers in the reserves to fit. So if they did half of the roofs in 2020, then those adjustments would go in, and this number will be very skewed if they hadn't done that. So they may or may not do it, but you got to get a number because you've got 3 days, remember, to go through all of these documents, and your client has to understand them and sign off. Doesn't mean you have to understand them either, but you should have reviewed them. One of the questions you should always ask the listing agent, what's the percentage funded in the reserves and what is that dollar-wise per door? 9 out of 10 or 9.5 out of 10 couldn't tell you that. But that's the financial health, which remember that corporation uses that money to maintain, preserve, and enhance that property. Okay, so in this particular instance, the reserve analysis, the assessment reserve funding schedule, and the reserve schedule that we got showed that this past year, they should have had in their reserve hard money. It could be in a CD or whatever, but there should be dollar amounts totaling up to $588,882. What we found on their balance sheet was that they only had that 165,036.92. Remember, that was in the insurance calculations. That was as of 11/30/2020. When you subtract the 165 away from the 198, it's a plus or minus. I don't see pluses very often. I did have one that was 138% funded, which meant it was overfunded. But right now, this one is 28.07%, fit into that top category, definitely special assessments and large increases. But when you want to negotiate in your transaction, you want to know an approximate amount that you can do that with. And in this particular case, the difference between those two, the 65 of what they have, what they don't have, they're minus 423,575.07. That divided by this 34 units comes out to 12,458. Most of the time, anybody who lives in a project are going to say, I don't want to pay for Jackie's roof when they have to do it 20 years from now. They forget that this calculation is based on already existing or depreciation of every single component in their association. This is the depreciation factor that they are trying to leave behind for the buyer. That's where buyer's agents begin to start looking at this a little bit differently, because that's negotiable in the contract. Somebody told me yesterday, oh, we're in multiple offers. That would never be able to be done. And I said, well, use these words that the attorney has told me that are very powerful. This is a material fact, and it was not disclosed. And therefore, we want to negotiate that. And there's many ways that we can do that. If you want to be able to have it on your sales where it is deductible in your taxes, pay the closing costs. That new carpeting that they want to put in, pay for that. Whatever it is to come up to that amount. This is an estimate, remember, based on numbers that the association has provided. Most of the time, the board doesn't want to raise the dues because it comes out of their pocket just as much as it does everybody else, or they'll say things like, Well, the dues are gonna have to go to $500 and nobody in here can afford it. They're spending anywhere from $600,000 to $800,000 or over $1 million, and they can't afford to have their dues raised. The dues are being raised out of whack because they didn't collect enough as they went through the years. They didn't take that reserve study very seriously, and so they did not contribute the amount that they were recommending. And these get way out of whack real quick. Or maybe the roofs start wearing sooner, or maybe the roadways need to be resurfaced because you've had a lot of floods and a lot of rain. I know that's happening right now. So this is what you're looking at. This is the number you want, not the percentage funded. What does it mean in dollars to my client today? Whether they use the seller or the buyer, because the seller has to disclose it and have in their mind what they're willing to come up with. Some agents are very smart and they'll go, oh, well, it is $12,458,000 short based on the information they provided us, but my seller is willing to reduce their price by $5,000 or $6,000, or we're willing to pay your closing costs or whatever. It's negotiation. My daughter taught me what the word no meant when she was 5. She's a lot older than that now. But when I asked her, she said, putting her hands on her hips, it means go away, think about it, come and ask another way. So does this number. This number is the one that if you're a listing agent, you should know because it's 50% of what you're selling. The maintenance repair of that building. Okay. So that in itself, that I know I'm going to get a lot of questions about, but that's what you really want to deal with. In the reserve category, the law says that they are required to do a physical inspection. This is not a destructive testing one, but it's where they go and do a visual inspection of every component the association is responsible for every 3 years and update numbers based on work that was done the previous year, during that previous year. If they do that, these numbers are not going to get out of whack like a lot of them are. But most of them say, oh, we don't want to spend the extra money, so we don't want to do that. Or they don't want to raise the dues because it's a pandemic and some people aren't working. That building keeps getting older. I mean, nobody told me what it was going to cost when I got a little older to be able to have my nails done, make sure I didn't have, you know, those golden roots and all of that stuff. Same with a homeowner association. Nobody tells them what it's really going to cost, but they're trying to leave it for the back end. And that's not always a good idea. So we're seeing more and more of these associations that are getting into the serious delinquency category as far as those reserves and what they're contributing. Again, there's no law that says they have to contribute, but there should be a document in the documents that allow you to see exactly how they plan on getting that money when it's needed. Generally, deferring the work, they have to give you a list of what they're going to defer. They have to tell you if there's going to be special assessments. And generally, a reserve company can actually put in there where you will need special assessments because the work will need to be done. Every year, if you have $75,000 worth of income, you have to have an audit of your CPA, a certified public accountant, to review the documents and give you either a review or an audit. That's guidelined by what your CC&R say. Regardless of what size or what amount of money you have coming in, it says in the regulations, and I'm verifying this again, but it says that you have to have a CPA do a balance sheet and present it to the membership every year. Income and expenses and balance sheet. It's kind of like a little annual report. Corporation annual report. Tell your shareholders how much they have in there, that type of thing. So the 75,000, this happened to be one. We did get the most current one, which was 7/30/20. They're due within 120 days. You can see that right down here. 120 days at the end of the fiscal year. and those should be mailed out. They are tied to the tax returns. So if the tax returns has an extension, the association should put a letter in there. So we're not looking for something that's not there. Managers get very upset. They use outside sources like Condo Certs and HomeWise. Great depository for the documents. Poor disclosure because they only put in there whatever the association gives them. Your managers sometimes are overloaded and never bother to look at the rules and regulations that have the previous management company's contact information or some other crazy thing in there. So that is the, let's see if there's anything else that I need to give you. The comments in the bottom of this is where you want to spend some time reading, because you only need to go those last 3 pages of the report. And we are at 11:20. Let me do that real quick. Oh, there's some other things we do. We also find out, is there an age restriction? If so, what is that? Is there a delinquency and collection policy, which should be part of the budget? Is there a schedule of monetary fines, meaning they can't give somebody a fine for leaving their garbage can out or whatever without following the procedure? And all this other stuff, including pet restrictions. And here's in the governing documents where I put was not signed or dated. This particular one, remember I said, we got the CC&Rs from the HOA, but they weren't a validated copy. We put comments in there about that, but then let's go to the very, we also inventory the minutes, tell you whether there's litigation, frequently asked questions. We'll have something, if it's in the governing documents, about termites, pet restrictions. We love our pets. We're not going anywhere without them. So you want to make sure that they are allowed. Sometimes they have a breed restriction or a size restriction. There's the missing documents, umbrella policy, insurance policy. Any association that's over 100 units has to have an umbrella policy, which is if they've got $2 million liability, they need to increase that. Physical inspections, those are the questions. You can see that what there are, so you can go back to the report. And then this is the page you put red marks all over it, circle it, highlight it, write nasty little notes, put pictures on it, whatever you want, but that's everything in a nutshell for you. That's it.
That was a ton of information. And I know there's a lot of questions that are in here. And if you're okay, I'm going to start asking some questions.
All right,
And
let's do
for
it.
those that want to stay past 11:30, you can. And then Jackie, whenever you need to jump off, you just let me know.
Okay, and we didn't even have a break. I know
We didn't.
I know it's a lot of information, but you've got my phone number, so anyway.
We
Okay.
could have done 2 hours. So I'm gonna ask some questions because I had to jump off and then I came back, so all of the questions are gone. But I remember there was some about zero fault lines. If you can answer.
Sorry, zero what?
Zero
Oh, zero lot lines. Okay, I can do that. Okay, zero lot line just means they're detached rather than attached.
Okay.
And zero lot line means that they're very close. There's usually 3 feet between them, or maybe a little bit more, because somebody's got to be able to walk between them.
Okay.
Zero lot line are generally PUDs, except the one I've got in Milpitas that is a condo. So they usually will show up as a lot, and it will show you in the description more than likely that it's a zero lot line, just meaning that plot of land. It goes beyond the building.
Okay. Are property taxes different for condos versus PUDs?
Yes.
Okay.
Generally, your taxes are calculated on pricing as well as square footage. So yes, condos and PUDs, it doesn't really make any difference. You can marry those two together. They're just different for square footage and size rather than type. They get their money one way or the other. So property taxes are, and then the association, even the recreational facilities within a project are divided up amongst that and calculated into the property taxes. So
Okay,
square footage and not type.
okay. This David Sterling report, I've seen some questions about where do you get that?
This report right here is ours. It is the one that we do when you send us the link to all of the documents that you've been provided. If you're a listing agent and you give that to us, we're able to go through it and let you know where the weak spots are so that you can clean them up and the report can then address those. The owner has asked for these documents and they're not provided or whatever. You want the liability on the association, not on the seller. If you're a buyer, then that list
Okay.
of missing or outdated documents goes back to the seller and their agent to be able to go back to the HOA to access.
Okay. How soon before going live on the MLS should you request the HOA packet? And I guess I'm going to follow up to that. How long do they have to give it to you?
Good thinking. Okay. They have 10 days in which to produce those documents from the date that you put it in writing to them, either your title company or the agents. We get requests. We have about 150 associations we do the disclosures for. I'd like to really expand on that because then I'm in control. I'm a control freak for that. But the thing is that the associations have 10 days. And sometimes they say after you paid them. So they use CondoWise or CondoWise, Condo Search and HomeWise to deliver the documents to. But in between, there's a crack every once in a while between the time a budget goes out and the time that they're requested by those companies to put it onto the system. Managers don't run to put documents onto Condo Search and HomeWise. So we find a lot of missing or outdated documents that we receive from those two services. And it's not their fault and it's not the managers, it's just timing. So 10 working days, you should, okay, depending on your location and your market. The market is a big detector to let you know when you should do it. I say that if you're gonna put that on the MLS, on February the 1st, you should have, well, let's do it another way. On February the 15th, you should order them today. Have a 15-day time frame between the time you think you're going to put it on. Then if you don't sell that property within, I mean, they're selling really fast, but if you don't sell it within a certain period of time, there you want, let's say that it's 3 months. You need to have us let you know if anything is outdated or missing that's of importance. We don't care if it's not financial. Financial is the biggest piece that makes a decision or breaks a decision for a prospective buyer. And so at least give yourself 15 days before you're going to put it on the market. So if anything goes wrong, and if you want us to review it, we need at least 3 working days. We prefer a little bit more when we're on the seller side, only because that list is a little, we're waiting for the manager still to produce them.
Let's see. We're going to get everybody your contact information. There's lots of questions for that. This is recorded, so we will absolutely get you the recording as soon as we have it. We answered the
And if
question.
you give me a copy too, and if I'm allowed, I'll put it on to our website so that it will be readily available for people in several different places.
Yep.
I'm excited. That's great.
There's some kind of questions about, you know, how much time do you need to pull this report?
Three working days, and I bet we've been a little bit backlogged because for some reason it seemed that nobody worked in December, and in January they piled us. But I would say 3 working days, and we'll let you know if there's anything. After that 3 working days, and sometimes even after the 2nd day, you'll get a list of what's missing. And then that list goes back to, if you're on the buyer side, it goes back to the listing agent so they can get them from the HOA. once those documents come in, we insert them and incorporate them into the report the one day. Do not drop one document a day on us, because we're only doing one update. So if we get one a day, we look at a certain amount of time that we do, including our conversation. And if we go over that, then we start charging extra money. Our fee is $425 or $475, and our turnaround time is 3 working days right now. If you can give us a little extra time, that's great, but
when were racial limitations and CC&Rs outlawed in California, how does that compare with other states? Were we earlier or later than others?
Boy, that's a question I don't really have a direct answer for, but it's been years, because you'll see on a statement that goes on top of the governing documents with the prelims that anything about racial or ethnicity of any kind is gone. And I'm glad that there's no room for that in any of our documents at this point. So I don't know whether we were earlier or later, probably earlier, because California generally is. But if somebody really is serious about that, they can send me an email and I'll see if I can research it.
Okay.
Maybe the
from your experience, do sellers usually cooperate when you start asking for additional information?
Unless they want to be liable for the missing stuff. But we're not going to ask. Okay, so let's say that we didn't get a set of minutes for November. Is that a serious issue that we have to go back and fight? It's not monetary. We're looking at, they usually don't give me any guff unless it's the board president who's trying to sell, and he knows that those documents will tell the truth about them not wanting to raise the dues. So it varies from transaction to transaction, but I go after financial and governing documents that have a bind to the property. Everything else is great, but it's not a drop dead or a deal killer. I have a nickname, it's called Deal Killer. But I say this last year, we saved more money to people. We saved $50,000 for one buyer because we found out a deficit. So those deficits are negotiable and puts it in a good light when you can negotiate. So just depends, monetary, and if it's going to affect a buyer, then we really press to get stuff.
Somebody wrote, I've noticed in some, I'm not sure what word this is, but sometimes they use the word unit and sometimes they use the word lot. Do you see that happening?
Well, that's kind of a universal tie. If you say unit, it could depict either. However, unit in the prelim is always a condominium, always airspace ownership. The word lot is always where you own the building. So those terms are, you can use them. You can't use a planned unit development for a condo, but a condo can be a unit. But if it says unit and it's in the prelim, it is always a condominium, airspace ownership.
Okay. Is an HOA sales demand a requirement for the sale?
Yes, because a demand is a statement from the association as to how much is due on that property. And they generally will also collect transfer fees and also a couple of months up front so that people can get in and own the property before they start having to make a deposit. They'll ask for a grant deed along with that demand. So yes, a demand, I would say, is always always required to clear the property for any past due assessments.
Okay. Can you explain the difference between an HOA and the neighborhood pool club, which does not have a mandatory membership?
Generally, an HOA is responsible for some kind of maintenance to the units, the buildings themselves. in a pool cabana type situation. They're single family houses. They have no, the governing documents are not guidelined for that, only for the recreational facilities.
Okay. Let's see. If a root from a tree in the common area damages your garage floor, who's responsible?
That would be an insurance claim question. But insurance generally will take care of it. And if you note, your policy might also help to cover that deductible. So generally speaking, that's what the common area insurance is for.
Okay. Let's see. Is it okay that the property management company wants the seller to pay a third party assigned to order the HOA docs? Because they charge a lot of money, several $100s for a transfer. The third party emailed those documents to title. Title never looked it through and forwarded to the listing agent. What should the listing agent do to make sure that someone is responsible for the HOA docs?
The seller is. But let me back out. There is a regulation in the Davis Sterling Act that says a homeowner association can be self-managed or managed by a company. When they go to a management company, the management company has a management fee, but then they have those little extras tacked onto it. So if somebody's going to sell or refinance, they do the documents that are required. This is the whole thing that we've been talking about today, is that nobody is doing quality control on those documents. The management has either a service like HomeWiser Condo Docs, which is just a housing for the documents, or they do them right out of house or in one of their offices where they gather the documents and send them out. There's no quality control whether they're being done in-house by that management company or the HomeWiser Condo Docs. This is my pet peeve. You pay for a set of documents, $300, $400, $600, $800. I saw the other day, $800 for a set of documents. You're not guaranteed that they're fully disclosed. They might have a budget in there, but that budget didn't answer any of the questions that we talked about. So the quality control comes from a separate party based on if the seller is worried, shouldn't worry. It is his due diligence to either review those documents, and they say you only have to tell material facts that you know about, and the minute you look at those documents, you're responsible, but you're it anyway, whether the association does the disclosure and doesn't do it correctly or doesn't do it at all. So the thing that you do is you have a third party, it's like a termite report, a roof inspection, home warranty, regardless, we're all of those combined by doing this report, because we check a box. If it's not checked, you know exactly what's missing. And if you can't get it, when you go back to get it, you send our email and they don't respond to you, whether it's the management company and or the board of directors, then the management company and the association is on the hook for any non-disclosure. That's where you want to take the liability away from the seller, but they don't normally do it. They just pass documents. They don't know most of the time that they have even got a deficit in their reserves. All they know is the market value is X, and they're going to get $10,000 over market because there's multiple offers. Just once praised property value is one thing, actual value for what the content is separate.
This is true. Let's see. How do you know which of the HOA rules would change in the future, which ones are locked in? How do you know how to evaluate the HOA politics to help to predict this?
Okay, so let me see if I understand this question.
I feel like that's a loaded question.
Yeah, well, okay, it depends on whether you're talking about the board of directors. The board of directors, the bylaws will tell you how many board members, how long they are on the board, and when they have to have elections. Last year in 2020, there's a new election rule, and they cannot hold an election unless they have the new set of rules. If they do, it invalidates. You've always got to have a wronged party that's willing to go after the party who wronged them. So the board, I know I've got one right now. The politics in this association is so heavy and thick that you cannot go even to a Zoom meeting. They have everybody on the little microphone with the arrow through it because they don't want anybody to talk. The only way you can relieve that is to get rid of that board and get a new board, and it doesn't mean you're going to get anybody better. Ultimate responsibility, if all of that goes south and you can't get them to do anything, you've got to get rid of that board. You take them to court and you have them put into receivership. Receivership is where the courts take over. There's a receiver that's assigned. That receiver, we put together a program for the receivers, and we go in, we update the governing documents, we do all of that. It takes about 2.5 years to go through the process, but none of the owners have anything to say about anything. If we have to do a roof, we bill them and they get to pay it.
And I assume you've got to have all kinds of documentation that the board isn't performing and showing that they're locking people out.
Yeah,
those types of things.
The minutes are very, very important. And the board of directors is obligated to have an agenda because they cannot talk about at a meeting anything other than what's in those minutes. And so they can't have arbitrary stuff coming in and dropping on them. So you've got the minutes. The minutes are due to the membership 30 days after the date of the meeting. So the problem that we're having is that during this pandemic, so many boards didn't bother to meet. They cannot conduct any business without having a meeting. So they may have gotten into contracts that are way out of line during the pandemic where they didn't have a meeting and actually have a vote. They should be taking roll call votes on every single thing. And as of January last year, they are required to get 6 different I think it's maybe 6 or 9 different documents every month. Every board member is to get those and review them and ratify them in the next set of minutes, meaning that they understand them and that they've read them, and they don't, they just sign off. So, you know, it's kind of like there's nobody keeping the store, and then I come along and the managers get mad at me and the boards get mad at me. The agents sometimes get mad at me, and I just want you to know that's fine with me because I'm only the end result of all the dysfunction that comes before that.
And I remember there was a question about, you know, what do you do if you see the minutes and they're just terrible and vague? And it sounds like you'd have to go through this process. But is there something you can say to the board of directors that maybe lets them know, like, hey, your minutes are not thorough, they're not understandable, they're vague?
Well, that is a great question. I always say if they produce a newsletter, you want the newsletter too, and those are not required, but you get more information. If the board is not keeping good minutes, go to the Davis Sterling website. And I should have, let's see if I put it in here. The Davis Sterling website, whenever in doubt in anything like that, you go there and it says minutes. What you could say to the board, I know the board, you've been on this board for, let's say, 2 years now. And I'd like to know in the May 2019, what you talked about. Your minutes didn't say anything except you voted on the new insurance policy. What was the amount you voted on? The board has to understand that the minutes are the history of what's gone on with that multi-million-dollar corporation that's to maintain, preserve, and enhance. If they bought stock and couldn't get minutes of the board and executive meetings, they might sell their stock, so it's a big investment. And even the board of directors has to take responsibility. The minute they become a board member, they have a different liability. They have a fiduciary duty to all of the members to wear the hat to serve all of them, not just them. And now on the Davis Sterling, they've got some new little 2-minute videos, and one of them happens to be about that. And so you, for 2 minutes, I mean, I thought I had put it down there. I will put on everything I do in the future, that little website address, but it's just, you can put in the bar at the top, Davis, DAVIS dash Sterling is spelled STIRLING.com, and it'll bring it right up for you. And it's indexed so that you can find any subject. I spend hours on that darn website. I've often called Adrian, who is one of the partners, and told him, "You're driving me crazy. I can't get through all of this stuff." So it's very subject to each person. There's a lot of people that are going to buy that just love it because it's in the school district, it's close to the municipal little train system, it's close to downtown or Starbucks. We don't know what their values are when they buy. They may never care about any of this, but up front, you provided the documents, you know what they got. And if somebody says, "Well, nobody told me that I couldn't change that little linen closet into another bathroom," and yet there's other things that come into play. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Okay, there's still a lot of questions in here. I if you want, I can answer some more and we can just keep going. But some of these, I think
let's take 5 more minutes to,
okay, that's perfect.
And then I know the next time we can deal with this, or on the next class I do, you can give me the questions and we'll rotate the questions.
Absolutely, yeah.
On the class. I am not an attorney, but I use, like I said, the Davis Sterling website frequently. Eventually, I will have all these little sections hyperlinked, so you can just push it and it'll take you to the website. So, my job is to try and make yours easy. Okay, what other questions do we have?
One of the questions is, let's say there's issues and somebody, sorry about that, and somebody sues the association. Do the board members, are they protected in any way? Or are they also liable for the decisions that they make financially as individuals?
This is where you find out. Okay. So the board of directors has an errors and admissions policy. It's called the directors and officers policy. Earlier, I did give you a hint, but we went right over it. The board is protected by the fact that they have that directors and officers policy. The insurance company will defend them in the court case, but will not pay a claim if they've been found negligent. So they have to have done their due diligence and their fiduciary duty, because if they're found that they didn't trim somebody's tree because they got mad at them one week, that doesn't follow the criteria of the law, then the insurance company will probably say, "We won't pay the claim, we defended them, and here's the claim." He's still asking. We have one just like that in one of our homeowner associations. The guy wanted the association to maintain his plumbing and his bathroom inside of his unit condominium. And they didn't do it. He let it go, ended up gutting his whole entire unit. He hasn't lived there in 5 years, and now he was something like $1.5 million. The insurance company is defending the association, has found that they have done everything that they were required to do and would not pay. There was no claim. They declined it. But if there was anything that they paid, they defended the board. The board would have been found negligent. Whatever the portion of that part of the claim, the association members, it would have been divided up between them and they would have paid. So you want to know that your board of directors is complying with the law. We do a lot of these reviews for homeowner associations so that they know what they should be working on.
I was going to ask if you worked with actual HOAs and the boards to help them make good decisions and do all of these things to avoid issues.
Yes, and a lot of times they may be a brand new board and not have a clue where to go. So we have a board training, but that is one, when I have 2 management companies now that we do all of their disclosure packages for them. And each time they're going to go out and make a bid, they don't do what most of the management companies, they go out and say, oh, well, we'll do this for $500 or $1,000. What they do is my report, and they get a set of documents. They know where the problems are, and they know whether they can afford to do it for what they've told them. So they might go in and say, for the first 3 months and getting these things cleaned up, here's your pecking order. As you get them, we'll reduce your price. So there's a lot of different things that can be done. The biggest thing is finding out whether or not they're in compliance or not, and being able to identify who's going to fix it.
So this is kind of an interesting question. So somebody bought a condo on the downstairs floor, and apparently the upstairs unit had hardwood, which was supposed to be carpet. So the seller said, okay, I'll get the upstairs unit to change it back to carpet. But at the closing, it wasn't done. So they gave the seller gave a $5,000 credit to the new owner. Can the HOA force the person above them to change it back to carpet from hardwood? So I guess kind of the question is, are there rules even when you own that condo of what kind of flooring and what you can do within your own unit?
Absolutely. It's called use restrictions and architectural control. If they say that you cannot have hardwood, and it's in the governing documents, that association manager, whether it was the board of directors or a management company, screwed up at escrow. They should have required that it either be done prior to closing or funds be left in that they could verify that it got done.
And then I assume the upstairs person who changed it to carpet
Didn't
is
do
responsible.
He did not do an architectural, unless he had approval from the board of directors, that architectural, anything you do to that unit, including if you do something that has a code, a city code to it, a building code, that you don't get a building permit for, you decided to do it on your own, you could be held liable for that also. That's what home inspections find. But definitely if the person that is selling that unit on the second floor, we have it in our demand form. It is violations of CCNRs to be clarified, to be corrected prior to close of escrow, or negotiated to be done within 30 days after closing. Funds to be left behind. And they usually leave a lot of money in escrow so that it can get done. And if administrative time is required by the management, they get paid for it. There's funds to be able to pay for it. So yeah, depending on the CCNRs, but a lot of these new floorings, you can get permission from the association to have the hardwood floors, but you have to put certain soundproofing layer in between. So it's all about that architectural control requirement that they may or may not have, sounds like they didn't follow it. And yeah, it has to get done at the time of escrow.
Okay. We're gonna cut questions there. We will get everybody Jackie's information. There's been some notes in here that you have been able to help people tremendously with reports and getting credits and finding things and doing things like that. So Jackie, we'll send your contact information out to everybody with your website. We'll make sure everybody gets a copy of this. Any final thoughts?
No, just that we'd like to help buyers and sellers and their agents to make the transaction a lot more informative for the person who's buying not only a home, but a multi-million-dollar corporation.
Mhm.
that has all the responsibility for maintenance on that unit, except the interior. So yeah, I mean, it's been great. I always enjoy this. I'm not an attorney, but I have a lot of opinions. I always find stuff and I will always direct you to an attorney if something we can't find in the Davis Sterling or a place that gives you common sense. And most of this is common sense. So thank you
So you-
very much. I
they
appreciate
say